Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. The International Association of Yoga Therapists is underwriting this episode of the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler. And that's going to give me a chance to tell you a little bit about the conference that's taking place on November 15th and 16th, 2021, called the Symposium on Yoga Research. This is a special conference that the IYT puts on every fall. Usually we have it in person at Kripalu, so in future years, keep an eye out for that. But this year, due to COVID, it is online. And there's something really great about that because you don't have to travel, you don't have to pay for a hotel or a flight, and you can get the best yoga research delivered to you in your living room that's already been vetted by IAYT. And you can count on knowing that what you're learning are the best studies out there. We have a whole team that works together to scan all the latest yoga and yoga therapy research out there and bring it to you in a very nice little package. So you're getting to learn from the best yoga researchers in the world. We've got a lot of international guests coming, and I've already seen who's presenting, and trust me, it's a really fabulous lineup. And so this is going to help you increase your knowledge, get your continuing education units. You can get up to 12 CEs for coming to the conference. It's going to help you work with your clients a little bit better with the knowledge that you've gained. And it's going to help you be able to refer to studies when you go to try to link up with a healthcare provider, a psychologist, doctors, PAs. You're going to be able to count on knowing that the studies that you're presenting are actually valid and reliable, and that you can stand behind them because, like I said, IOIT has already done the vetting for you. In addition, there's these things called poster presentations, which are really kind of mini yoga presentations that come in a program book where all the abstracts of the posters are written up for you. And that it can be really valuable too when you're going to a healthcare provider to say, here's an abstract of a study that I think you should read. Here's how I can help you as a yoga therapist, and hopefully get yourself more work. The replays for the conference are going to be available for up to a year afterwards. So even if you're hearing this podcast a little bit later, you could still get in on that deal where you can pay and hear the replays. Students, you get a discount, and that could be a university student, or it could be a student in an IAYT accredited program. The main conference on November 15th and 16th is $135. If you want to do the pre-conference workshops, add $30 and it's $165 total. And remember, you get tons of CEs for that too. Although I guess if you're a student, you don't need a continuing education just yet. But for those of us who have graduated and do need CE units, the main conference is $225. And the pre-conference plus the main conference is $275. One other thing I just want to tell you quickly before we get into the podcast is there's a BIPOC discount, and there's a discount for people who live in countries that are identified by the World Bank to be lower to middle income. So if you go on the IAYT website, which is www.iayt.org/SYR for Symposium on Yoga Research, if you go there, you'll see the BIPOC discount, you'll see the World Bank discount, and those of you who don't apply to either of those, you can obviously apply there. Again, it's www.iayt.org/SYR. So I hope to see you at the conference. It's going to be a great one this year, and get in there, get your continuing education units and learn, right? That's what we all love to do, is kind of keep moving forward with our knowledge. So you are about to hear an amazing conversation with a woman that I'm just getting to know, but I have a lot of respect for her, and I want to just show you who she is from the inside out. She's so authentic, so real, so generous, so full of vitality. She is a mindset and Ayurveda coach, a global speaker, a best-selling author that has won some pretty prestigious awards. And her name is Sweta Vikram, spelled SwetaVikram. And she's at swetavikram.com. And the reason that I wanted to talk to her is because she has published many books. She has been a writer since she was very, very young. And I just wanted to question her about the connection between yoga, Ayurveda, and the process of writing. Writing as meditation, writing as self-care, writing as a way to go inward and connect deeply with yourself, writing as a way to explore who you are. She goes into all of this in this interview, and it's really kind of changed my perception since I have spoken to her, because in my mind, writing a book, there was always an outcome and there was always a goal, and I had to get there. And I'm a failure if I don't get there. And why can't I do this? And what's wrong with me? That's kind of the self-story that I've been telling myself. And after talking to her, I feel a little different. I feel like writing should be a joyful experience. It should be about the process, the spiritual connection of going inward, and writing as a way to nourish myself. This is a really weird way to think about writing for me, because in my mind, it's always been so outcome oriented. And I'm going to try this. I'm going to really take deeply in what she talks about in this interview and see if I can't find a way to shift my perception. And the irony of that is I'll probably get a very different outcome than I have been the last 4 years, which is there's no book. So I'm kind of interested to take this more spiritual approach and see what happens. I have nothing to lose. And it sounds like a whole lot more fun to do it this way. So I introduce you to Sweta Vikram, my colleague, my friend, and I think you're going to really enjoy listening to this interview about the process of writing and becoming a writer. Thank you for coming today, Sweta. It's so nice to have you, and I've been looking forward to speaking with you for such a long time. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm really excited to be here. And as I was telling you before we started talking formally, when we were doing our informal chit chat, I really admire your work. So very grateful to be sharing this space and evening with you.
Thank you. And evening it is for you. You're on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, and neither one of us are nighttime people. let's try to keep each other awake and keep our audience awake. And, I just want to start off by saying you have published so many books and poems, and you have a new book out that came out on September 21st, 2021, and it's available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Target. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this book? Because this is actually how you and I came to get to know each other, as I got to see kind of a preview copy of your new book.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for that. So this is what the final book looks like, A Piece of Peace. And it is, and you've read the book, Amy, it's an autobiographical account. It was my struggle with a chronic illness. And, and I know my story is not unique, but sometimes I feel we need to listen to more and more stories to feel less isolated in our own journeys and struggles and triumphs, whatever have you. I just won one of the biggest awards for my novel, Louisiana Cats. This is 2018, which Chelsea Clinton had won in the past. Founders of the Me Too movement had won. My husband and I were in Europe. I was like hiking through caves in Croatia. 3 weeks later, I'm in the ER fighting for my life. So it's not like, oh, I was sick and I couldn't do this. I was hiking 10, 15 miles daily. So I went from that to fighting for my life where we didn't know whether I would make it or not. So I think one of my big fears was when I was sick, when I came home and the doctors couldn't figure out, it took them a while to figure out what was going on. As a writer, writing is how I navigate the world. I was so afraid. What would I do if I couldn't write? Who will I be if I'm not a writer? And I had to really, and as a yoga expert, you can really relate to this, right? Like I had to work with my ego. Like my identity cannot be what I do, right? And it's okay to evolve. So all the Ayurveda yoga teachings that I work with my clients, my students, I had to practice on myself. But long story short, that's what led to this book because I learned so much. And by the time my recovery happened, the pandemic hit, it felt like a lot of us needed to read what's in this book. It's a collection of essays that helps creative people break their creative blocks. There's a section on navigating the pandemic. There's a section on chronic illness. And on one hand, they might seem like they're separate things that exist in silos, but they're not. People can battle chronic illness while doing yoga, while traveling the world and, dealing with the pandemic and a family, all of that. So, yes, I personally was looking for that little piece of peace that would tell me that things would be okay. And it was just very unnerving. And I had to find my own pathway. And that led to this book.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I feel like you're so authentic and you really put out there to the world in your writing as well as your social media, like a real woman who is doing her best every single day, using her yoga, using Ayurveda, using the process of writing to stay in balance, to heal yourself. It's like you're doing it right in front of us. And I find that very, very inspiring.
Thank you so much. And there's been a lot of unlearning and learning to do. And, when I think, like I always joke about this, what most people went through with the pandemic, I went through in 2018. The difference was I was stuck at home for 6 months while the rest of the world moved on. Here we were all stuck at home. So my husband and I would joke, like we have a practice of, bunkering down and staying at home. But honestly, we are so complex and complicated as human beings. We're also simple and beautiful. I had to deal with my own BS. I had to understand what my shortcomings were, because you can't just always say, why me, why that? It's one thing to be spiritual on paper, but really showing up to your practice was a whole other thing when you're dealing with so much suffering. So I had to find grace in my hurt, in my anger, and I had to find grace in my healing and grace in forgiveness. So there was just a lot of learning. And I don't think, you're on a high when you win an award like that. I was doing wine tasting, like I wasn't ready for a yogic high. So just acceptance of these are the cards that have been dealt. What am I expected to learn from this?
And isn't it humbling, because I've had some chronic illness too, to be a yoga teacher and Ayurvedic practitioner and, living your life in this lifestyle, and then to wake up one day only to find out there is chronic illness. That was very humbling for me. I wouldn't go as far as to say embarrassing, but maybe bordering on embarrassing. How about you?
I think it was very humbling. And I have to say, it was almost like the 7 stages of grief. And then you realize which stage are you stuck on the most. So to your point, it was very, very humbling and just very leveling. And, for a very long time, my anger wasn't, why am I saying why isn't somebody else? It was never that. It was like, why me? I do the yoga. I try to do good in the world. Like I'm doing the textbook things, not to check the boxes, because I really feel that's who I am. And then why me? And one of my teachers said to me something which really transformed my thinking. And that's why I believe it's so important to always be a learner, not just a teacher, because, that's how our own evolution happens. And she said to me, it's pretty arrogant to think that just because you take care, you won't fall sick. Because you take care, your recovery will be a lot faster. Your healing will be faster. Your awareness will be on a different plane. But don't assume just because this is how you eat, this is how you live, this is how you navigate the world, you won't be hit with hard times. So I think that was the embarrassment part, I was like, oh, I was being a child here. Like I was being a baby, being a brat. And so I think it was important to also have these conversations versus, and people mean well. I like to believe most people are good and they mean well. Very often say, oh, why did it happen to you? But you do yoga. How did you fall sick? And I'm like, if I knew, trust me, I think I wouldn't be where I am. But so I think people were also trying, everyone was just shocked that I was sick, because my doctor and I would joke about, like, I was a doctor's nightmare because there was nothing wrong, kind of a thing. Ever so all, but then this conversation really helped shape my perspective. Like, no, just because you do good doesn't mean good will always happen, and good people suffer too. So don't be attached to these expectations of your effort and outcome. So all my Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, I had to live it, practice it, and learn to grow.
I completely agree. And, one of my teachers talked to me about something similar, and she said, the bad things are going to continue to happen, but what is your response? What is your perception? How are you going to digest it, process it, use what you can, let go of the rest? That's the yoga. It's not that, like, if you eat well and do your asana and do your pranayama, bad things won't happen. They will. But how do you respond to that?
Right. In the Ayurveda world, we talk about 5 elements, right? And there's the 3 doshas of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And I won't go into my Ayurveda nerd hat mode, but the reason I bring this up is because I was talking to a friend and she was asking me the same thing, like, how do you not get shaken up by rude behavior? Or like, how do you not feel like punching? I was like, oh no, I feel all of those things. I just don't act on them. Because I remind myself, what do I want to be? Do I want to be strong and rooted and kapha like a banyan tree? Or do I want to be like that bamboo shoot that moves the way the wind blows? I said, if my life and my behavior was a reaction to everyone's bad behavior, where is my center? And to your point, it's like you have to have these practices, not for when good days. When, pardon my French, when shit hits the fan. That's when these practices come in handy, because you realize, like, you will go through all the emotions, but you don't lose your center. And that's when you know something is working.
100%. I love that. So, our topic today is all about writing. And I read your book, the early drafts of it. And I've been trying to write a book for, 4 or 5 years now. And I've actually written several different books, and then I never allow myself to get to the place where they'll actually be put into the world. I have all these drafts. And when I read your draft, and then I saw on social media, you'd said, oh, I turned in my draft and my publisher really crushed it, or something like that. You said there was some pretty harsh feedback. I thought, that's the difference. I mean, I'm sure you're a really wonderful writer, and I'm still working on that. But the difference is you're willing to put the draft out there and take the critical feedback and work to improve it so that one day it can be an amazing book that helps people. So my first question is, how do you get to that point where you're willing to put it all on the paper? And this is a very yogic concept, I think. And just let it be what it is, and then let people read it and trash it and tell you how it could be better. Like, how do you do that?
I think you will understand this the best, Amy. Going back to your point of this being very yogic in philosophy. So I tell any of my students, my clients, yoga is like writing and writing is like yoga. You show up without being attached to the outcome. Show up daily. Some days you'll have 10 minutes, some days you'll have 2 hours. But it's like exercising those muscles, and all of a sudden you realize in Tadasana you're not moving. Or when you do your downward dog, you realize exactly how your elbows are supposed to be, how you need to be like a triangle. Writing is much like that. And I think the more you do it, the less ego and emotions are involved. So it's a very healthy level of detachment. I'm sure you've seen that with your students. Like the first time they show up on the yoga mat, they want to do a handstand. They might not have even done like cat-cow in their life before. Or just a tabletop, because that's the human mindset. And I know I used to be that person. I wanted to get into a wheel pose when I started my teacher training. And I'm like telling myself, but your muscles aren't developed. But the other part of me is like, but I'm doing my teacher training. I should be in a wheel pose. So I think the human mindset and psyche is very similar, whether it's writing, yoga, or anything else. So the first thing I would say is to have discipline in place. Just the way we do it for yoga, it's non-negotiable, right? So writing has to be that. It shouldn't be something you go to if there is nothing else. It is something that you do just as you do your asana, meditation, cooking, walking, whatever makes a part of your daily rituals, right? The other thing is your first draft is just getting stuff out there. So for a lot of people, they edit when they write, which to a certain degree might be fine because, whether your story is headed to Greenland or Australia, you want to have a sense, but then not to over edit. This is something that my third advice would be, and a lot of people might not agree, but this works for me. Don't overshare your work. I've seen that with a lot of writers, like, they write an excerpt, they put it up on Facebook, then they get that feedback, and then the mind games happen because then you think, I'm not good enough. Oh, this is the best thing. I'll never be better than this. I think Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this in one of her podcasts where, after she wrote Eat, Love, Pray, she just felt like there was a cloud. She would never write anything better than that. So have a very intimate, trustworthy group of 2-3 people that you share your work with at the most. Not too many, because that early feedback when things are in the raw stage, we are like sandpapered wound at that point. The skin is that thin and everything goes in, good or bad. So be very fiercely protective of your creative time, your creative energy, and who you discuss your work with. That's the other thing, right? Like we all have this stock of creativity on a daily basis because there are other things to be done too. Either I can talk about it, then where's my energy to write about it?
And so you choose your little pot of people that is going to take your precious bud and keep it sacred, be honest about it, but also tell the truth about it, and also in a way that maybe Sweta can hear or Amy can hear. But when you get that critique, I mean, this is for myself, and I hear this from a lot of other people trying to write, that critique is so sharp. And even if it's not intended to be, it kind of stabs a bit. How do you deal with that?
So I take about 2 weeks to react or respond to a critique. That's my time frame. So before the publisher, the editor will write, said, like if you're responding to the editor, and inside your head, especially when the book is coming to that point where you think it's almost done, in your head, you think this is the best thing. You're going to win the Pulitzer. And then the editor is like, kill this character. So my process is I'm a child of science. So what I do is I'm going to be very watchful of what I eat, how I sleep, what my practices are. So I am very stable on the inside when I look at that critique. Because the day I received the email, my nervous system is all over the place. But I will make sure I will acknowledge it and let them know I will respond in 2 weeks, because and editors appreciate that, publishers appreciate that. If there's something which is SOS, they'll let you know. They want you to take the time to not feel attacked and respond to the best of your ability, because everyone's ultimate goal is for the book to be its best version. So making sure that you are grounded, it's going to stink whenever you look at it. Let's not kid ourselves. But you won't personalize it if your core is centered. Then you're looking at it as like, in a job when your boss gives you feedback, when your annual appraisal is going on, kind of a thing, right? Then you look at it that way. Oh, these are things I need to improve on. They're not saying I suck. They say these things. So you learn to add that distance between you and the character.
I love that. You are so real. It cracks me up. But I really value that. And did you learn all this just through the School of Hard Knocks, or did somebody teach you this? Did you go to school to learn this? How did you get this process down of how to take care of yourself, but also, write a great book?
So, I've always been a writer. Even as a 5-year-old, I was practicing my autograph. It's a big joke in the family. I didn't know how I would have a book published, but I just knew I would write a book one day and I would be signing. I don't think I knew it was called an autograph at that point. There were 2 things I knew. I would be a doctor, like a doctor attached to me, get a doctorate, and be an author. So I think along the way, so I've been writing along the way. So I've also, as writers, we all psychoanalyze. You pay attention to those around you more than your own self. And you see what is working, what is not working. So up until the pandemic happened, I would go to writing residencies once a year, be there for 2 weeks, take time off work, clients, everything, and just focus on writing, be in the company of other writers. And I would meet people who year after year would return with the same project, like sometimes 10 years, right? And then I would see people who brought new projects. I brought a new project every year. And doesn't mean it got completed, but the point was, I'm like, if this is a sacred time, this is for writing. So I think some of the learning was on my own process, figuring out of what was working, what wasn't. And a lot of it was just observing others. For some people, writing residencies are happy hour, or it's like spring break, adult spring break. And for me, I realized I tried that. I was like, I can party when I go home. This is my sacred time to get my work done. And I really want to be in this space of being my characters, feeling my characters. If I wake up at 4 in the morning and I want to write without thinking about the pressures of home, work, clients, family, I'm going to use the 2 weeks for that. So I think just as yogis, we are more aware than a lot of people are. And then as a writer, you learn to pay attention, then you combine the two, and then you realize you're psychoanalyzing yourself, others, and everyone you meet becomes a teacher. So I think it was an amalgamation of all these experiences.
I love what you're saying about kind of becoming absorbed with your characters and their voices and their needs and their beliefs and how they want to express themselves. Like I can just imagine it's almost like your characters in your book become your object of meditation. And you're going from dharana, dhyana, samadhi, right? Concentration into meditation, into absorption with them.
You will love this. So when I go to this, I used to go to this particular retreat writing residency. And when I would come back, it would take me a week to physically recover. I kid you, because all that I would do there was like, it was a done thing. The first night we got there, the host would, do a big dinner for us. Then I would go out like maybe a couple of times with friends, and then the last night. Otherwise, I cooked at home or I got my meals. I kept to myself. I had always had a buddy that I would go to walk with or for yoga because I just needed those two things. Other than that, but I was like so immersed. I remember one of the trips I came back and my husband was traveling, and when a cleaning lady came and I told her, I'm sleeping. And she knows I wake up at crack of dawn. She's like, are you well? I said, just got back from this thing. She literally left in the afternoon, closed the door. I was still sleeping. I mean, I've known her for a while, so I didn't feel rude. But she was like, I've never seen you lay down in bed unless you were unwell. I was like, that's what the writing does. Like, it gets to your bones and everything aches. And it's almost like the detox process when you come back too, right? So it's equally important when you're finishing a project to have like a week of detoxification, because things will come out. There will be emotional upsurges and something will make you cry about something else. And it's a very humane process, but it also drains you out.
Okay, maybe this explains why I haven't been able to get a book out, because I just feel like I don't have 2 weeks to go away and then a week to recover. And maybe I need to structure my life to make that happen. Do you feel like that? I mean, that's what I want. That's how I picture it unfolding. But at the same time, I'm just so darn busy.
So are you working on a novel?
It's not a novel. No, it's about yoga and, but I think maybe this could be the block that I'm facing, is I need to, as you're saying, have more discipline on a daily basis, but then also have these times of total absorption and just allowing days and nights to flow together however it needs to come out.
Even if it's a week, I haven't been able to do that either because it's been really busy with everything during the pandemic. But I have a couple of artist friends who, have driven away like 2 hours away from the city, gotten themselves an Airbnb. The kids are with the partner. They've taken the time to create. And when they come back, they're like, I'm a better mom. I'm a better partner. I'm a better colleague, artist, all of that. So because this place expected you to be there for 2 weeks, that's why I said 2 weeks. And I had an arrangement with my boss that I could do that. But now I don't have the time to go away for 2 weeks either. It's just taking off from too much. It's more stressful. But I feel like even if it were a week around the holidays, right? Like you see family, friends, and then you're already in the mode where there might not be as many expectations or responsibilities, so to speak. It might be a good day to even try for like just 3 days, what that feels like.
Sweta, I was really interested in one of the chapters in your book. You said that you try to take 12 hours a week for quiet time. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, absolutely. I have to, full disclosure, the pandemic has ruined it. And the number of hours have gotten shorter, but I still do practice it. So, in yoga and Ayurveda tradition, Maun Vrat, which is the vow of silence, holds a lot of value. Even in Buddhism, the monks, they spend eternity in silence. So part of my Ayurvedic training, we had to do this because our teacher was like, you will notice the difference. You don't get 30 New Yorkers to shut up. It is not an easy task. And 28 of those were women, I think. So this is on a Friday night. And it was very, very interesting. So prior to we started that, like one of our seniors came in and she said, she has a potty mouth and like really cusses a lot and stuff like that. And she was like, she was at the World Financial Center and a car almost hit her. But because she was doing the vow of silence, she couldn't say anything. And she shared that example that it really sat with me because, we go through, especially when you use public transport, you're constantly in that flight or fight mode. I don't know why. That's how you become. And she said, because I couldn't say anything, the driver apologized. And so because the driver was like, I was going to scream, then he or she was going to scream, then somebody would come out of the car, and then the crowds would happen, right? She was like, he apologized. And she was like, I just felt so centered that I didn't I'm alive. I don't have a scratch on me. In the non-vow of silence mode, I would have been so reactive. So what that also does, Amy, is it really relaxes your organs, not just your brain. Like otherwise, our organs are also in this mode. Our sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, they're working overtime. So the vow of silence it takes care of your mind. It takes care of your body. The first time I did it was from like a Friday sundown, maybe until like 48 hours. I kid you not, we took before and after pictures, all of us, and it felt like we'd gone for some kind of a special facial with some kind of a peel because the skin looked exfoliated. It's when you are not stressed, you've given yourself the time to really bring your vata down. It's amazing how your insides feel rested too. So I started to bring this practice in, this vow of silence. I was like, okay, I don't have 48 hours in a week. But what if starting, like Friday at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., once we'd seen our friends and my husband and I were home, until the next day. So I didn't want to cheat. I didn't want it to be all night. Then what's the point, right? But like if it's Friday night and from 7 p.m. to 11 on a Friday night, if you're staying up late, it's still 4 hours of no television, no reading, no phone, nothing. You just sit with yourself, no eating. Until 7 a.m. the next day. What I would do sometimes is extend it to 11 a.m. because I'm not a big breakfast person. And I just realized that you become so non-reactive. It's not just that you're giving your mind rest, your voice some rest. And it is so amazing to not have to talk. And I am a chatterbox. And yet I felt it was so healing to not have to do that. So you do it for your mind, your body. It's like a fasting, right? Like a fasting from words. And a fasting almost, unless there's a health issue, never hurts us. So I still, during the pandemic too, I've been doing like 5 hours. I realized for a lot of my clients have been saying like they don't know how to turn themselves off because, everyone has a tablet, a phone, a television. Last year with the elections, everyone was hooked onto the news. You're going to bed thinking, but I was like, I don't want that. So I have like a lot of discipline in place, even at home on a weeknight after a certain time, the phone is off. I get to bed at a certain time. And even when I wake up, I will not look at the phone for an extended period of time because otherwise what we do is we look at information from a very reactive phase. So the same email will feel like a personal attack if you just wake up from your sleep and look at it. So this vow of silence is a really great way, damage control, because, it gives you rest. silence can be very healing. I realize every time I do this once a week, there is deep sleep because my body finally is getting the nourishment it needs. During the pandemic, we've all dealt with trauma. So it's also healing the trauma that has been unaddressed, and we don't know until when it'll go on because, everything is so unknown at this time. Right. So it's something that I would highly recommend. Figure out the whole idea is for people to not get overwhelmed by like 12 hours. So even if it's 4 hours, but that means no reading, writing, nothing. Just sit with the thoughts in your head. And you realize like the trouble is our own brain because all of the stuff is up here. It's our imagination. And then finally you come to that point where I am not my thoughts and my thoughts are not my future.
I love this idea, it being like a fast. And I love the thought of maybe even choosing not to eat or drink or satisfy the palate during that time either, just to let things settle. I think that's, the more space we can create in our minds. I actually think that could even help the writing process. I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, 100%. So like at this writing residency that I'm talking about, I would be in my bedroom latest by 8 p.m. and I wouldn't see others. There was one woman who would wake up like me before 5 when I would go into the kitchen to make my tea. Most people would go to bed at 3, so they would wake up 11. So there was a whole different pattern. But I would give myself a break from talking too. Like I would tell my husband a good night by 7:30 so I could work. And the phone was off and everything. And to your point, it forced me to turn inward, right? And then once the best writing happens, once we get outside of our own head. But if we are surrounded by so much noise, we never are able to get out of our own heads. And one of the things they recommend during this verbal fasting is actually to not eat or drink because you don't want to overwhelm any of the senses, right? So the whole easiest way to turn inward is when none of the senses are being played around with.
Like a pratyahara, the fifth limb of yoga, right?
Yes.
And I think that when the senses turn inward and we connect to something deep inside, that's when the best writing, the magic is probably going to happen. Because we are deeply connected to Purusha or Atman or whatever you want to call it, Holy Spirit, depending on.
Absolutely. I remember one of the first silent retreats I went to, I just slept. It was a 2-day urban retreat. And like by the end of the second day when they said, people could like talk, and I wrote a note to the lady who was hosting it. I was like, is it okay if I don't want to be rude, but this feels so healing that I don't want to talk. And she said, no, that's absolutely fine. So later when we connected, I was like, why was I sleeping so much? She said, that's the thing, because none of your senses are being messed around with. Your body is finally catching up on its own healing. So you'll also notice some of your best sleep. And when we are rested, it's the best thing for creativity in any case.
Yeah. Rest, space, quietude. So you also have a few chapters in your book, A Piece of Peace, talking about writing as self-care and even writing as a meditation. Can you talk about either of those or both of those?
Sure. I think especially for women, a part of it is societal, part of it is our own thinking. We sometimes believe we need to place ourselves at the bottom of the totem pole. Because I've spoken with enough women and they don't have the family pressures. They've assumed roles. And I always encourage them, then talk to your partners if you have one, that can we shift responsibilities? You just assume that. And the other person does not realize you're unhappy with this arrangement, right? So I think writing in that case becomes a form of self-care because when you start exploring these things, whether it's journaling or writing a letter to yourself or actually working on a book, you realize where you're stuck, where you're feeling stuck. So to me, that becomes like a huge part of self-care. At least for me, Amy, writing is how I navigate the world. But not everybody does that. Writing is something else that they do. So, but using writing as self-care also helps you understand what writing means to you. It's like when we're dating, right? Or people, when they go to one of my friends who's a therapist, she was like, Therapy is like dating. People shouldn't say yes to the first therapist they meet. Find someone who shares the same values.
Yeah.
So it's self-care in those terms. Like you write, you explore, and morning pages for some people, right? That really works. There's that subconscious stuff on the paper. That can be very healing, but it can also reveal to you where you're feeling stuck. And also it can be meditative because from an Ayurvedic perspective, for someone who has extremely high Vata imbalance, asking them to sit in a place and then shutting their mind, it's like telling someone to focus or relax is when they exactly can't do it, right? So as someone with a high Vata imbalance, it's harder for them to just sit quietly for 20 minutes. It's like fidgety and what do I do next? And then they might get nervous or anxious. But when they're writing, they get deeply connected into what they're doing. And that becomes meditation. Because who is to say meditation has to be seated? Walking in a park is meditation, right? Cooking is meditation. So that's how I see writing as a form of meditation. And it goes back to the conversation we started this evening with the daily practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But some days will be bad and others will be good, but we don't label them good and bad. Just showing up with due diligence and dedication is also what makes it meditative. And I think when it's meditative, it also becomes self-care, right? Because then you're able to disconnect and disengage from the world.
You just said something that's so interesting. I feel like my best writing comes when I am slightly Vata imbalanced. For me, I don't know why I think this, but I feel like it helps me connect to God, to the universe, to the ether. And it's what gives me that creativity. And I wonder if that's because I am very kapha. So I wonder if I need that kind of lift to kind of reach up to the sky and find those inspiring thoughts. But I hear you saying that just the opposite, that you like to feel very grounded and very quiet. So can you talk about that?
Sure. And I love that you brought this up because to your point, Vata is creative, right? Vata in balance is very creative. Vata out of balance or vitiated or disturbed can become nervous, anxious, sleepless. So the reason I want to work from a place of groundedness is I don't want to get to the disturbed Vata state. Mm-hmm. Also depends on what you're writing, right? So when I write about social issues, it's so important for me to not become the survivor, to not become their story. And it's not just because I don't want to patronize people, not just how do I do justice to someone else's story if I find myself in their stories. And I've done that when my Vata has been like, I'm in that highly stimulated, hyper artistic mode, I take on people's pain and then I fall sick. So finding that center helps me stay grounded. And I joke about it. It's almost like being in a corporate job at that time. You take on what you're meant to do, you do it and you finish it and then you go home and it's done. If I'm not grounded, that follows me wherever I go. Mm-hmm. I will see that at any dinner party, at any musical that we go to watch, any yoga classes I take, I will bring that there. And when you work with survivors long enough, you see one and you can sense when somebody needs help. So you don't know how to turn it off. And I think finding my center also helps me sort of dissociate in some ways, for lack of a better word. Like when I'm in this place, I'm not in work mode. I need to turn that off. Like I have a friend who would always say that for him to be creative, he needs to be bouncing off of walls. I hear that. And he would always tell me the same thing. How are you so calm? How can you create? I said, because my process, I've realized I can't create that way. And for him, like Hemingway would do that, right? One relationship, one book, and a lot of authors and writers do that. I was like, for me, my core is stability. So I am very high pitta, so I know I'll get stuff done, but I also have kapha, so stability works for me. So whenever my vata goes out of balance, I feel like my decision-making is incapacitated. So it's not the one aspect only, right? It's like, I might become creative, but I'll be like, oh, order in Thai food? No, cook Indian. Order in Italian? No, cook Mexican. So it becomes very unfocused in every which way. which my Pitta mind doesn't like. Pitta mind likes planning. So I think I've just gotten to know what works for my mindset. And I think the beauty is you know what works for you. And I wish more people spend time getting to know themselves rather than awaiting validation from outsiders. Because getting to know other people is a bonus, but getting to know yourself is the best gift.
Well, and it's actually, as I'm hearing you speak, I'm reflecting that maybe that's why I'm not getting these books done, is because I feel like I like that really airy, spacious, creative place, but that doesn't provide the discipline and structure needed to actually put out a book. And my nature is actually more like you. Maybe I should try this more disciplined approach and kind of a corporate. If I put it in that context, I'm really good at knocking out curriculum and projects and scheduling it. So maybe I've just been going about it all wrong.
And maybe like even if it's, whatever time works for you. For me, I do early morning writing on my projects before I start my day job. Because it's not just because it's out of the way, it's also Vata time of the day, it's the creative time of the day. And when you have it in your calendar, you will start showing up and one word, one sentence, one paragraph, one page, end of the week, like you have 2 pages ready. So you were taking that energy, but then you're channelizing it.
Yeah. You also talk about in your book why winter is a great time to write. And we're going into winter. So I wanted to ask you, why is it that you think winter is such a great time?
So again, this is coming from an Ayurvedic perspective. Ayurveda believes we are a miniature of nature. If we honor the circadian rhythm, if we live the way we are meant to live, not the way we choose to live, we would all be healthier. I mean, if you look at animals, right, they hibernate. So many of them, they get their adipose tissue on so that there comes spring, they'll go foraging, summer, they have fun, all of that stuff. I feel like after the busyness of summer, but summer is busy but also light. You have these pockets of when you can have fun. And when the minute there is fall that comes in, I know every single person, including myself, it's like I feel cheated, like somebody stole away time from me. Like autumn it's a very, very busy season. But then winter is the time, especially when you live in places when it's cold, instead of cribbing about that, like, okay, some days you can, but for the most part, that's your opportunity. Like the universe has given you time and created spaces for you to buckle down and get work done because your distractions are fewer. Some are distractions, right? How many barbecues can you say a no to, right? How many road trips and hiking trips can you say a no to? Oh, winter, none of those, especially when you, like, I live in New York, we have like harsh winters. So it's such a, and also what happens is over spring, then spring, the la-di-da mode starts, summer is like, woo, and autumn is like, what hit me? But this is the time to also connect with yourself, right? Also
inward.
To completely turn inward, like after all the buzz and all the outside energy that we've had, which is all great, but we as human beings need to connect with ourselves. And during the pandemic, and I'm sure you've read these studies too, Amy, where people who did all right were the ones who didn't have trouble being with themselves. We all missed company. But for those who have always relied only on others to get themselves going, it's been much harder on them. So I think winter is such a good practice of really figuring out what do you want to do, connect with what is it that you want. And Mother Nature is giving you an opportunity. There is no FOMO of I will miss that. No, there is really not much happening. So, and it's basically 2 months, right? It's like January, February, half of March. Up until December, the holidays are on.
Right. I love that. And I think that's another strategy, is to use that natural time of hibernation and going inward and actually saying, I'm going to take these 3 months and really be with myself and get quiet and structure that time. And it's also probably high vata, so there will be some of that creative energy flowing through the fall and early winter. So
Right.
That's beautiful. And then how do you overcome writer's block? I think, you have these times scheduled, you've decided you're going to write. Does it just flow out of you, or are there times where you just get totally blocked, and what do you do then?
So, when you write across different genres, one doesn't work, you work on something else, right? A, one is that strategy. B, when you feel like things are not moving, I turn to my yoga mat, or I'll go for a walk, or I'll hit the gym. Because when I'm not consciously thinking, thoughts come to me. When I'm, what we resist persists, and what we chase never turns back and looks at us. That's true in love. That's true in so many things, right? So, and I mean that in a funny way, but so that's what I do. I don't put that pressure, because I'm like, this is not an emergency room situation. It's such a privilege and so much joy to be a writer. Why am I punishing myself? And then I also will psychoanalyze myself, like what else is going on in my life where maybe I don't, like my mind is on something else. So maybe I don't have that creative energy. And so, but then again, how do we define creativity? I have another very dear friend who's a psychotherapist, and she said to me when, I would, like when I had fallen sick, and I would tell her, like, I'm so scared where, when will I write? But she was like, you write Facebook posts daily. You're tweeting daily. That is creativity too. Stop adding labels. So people shouldn't think they have a writer's block. If you can tweet, if you can share an Instagram post, if you can write a blog post, you might not be working on this current project, but if you can still type one coherent sentence, you're a writer. So it's, I think, reminding your brain, you don't control me. I will always be a writer. This project, maybe I need to take a break. We do that with friendships and relationships too, right? Like we need some space. Doesn't mean it's an end, but it's reminding yourself, like, I'll just tweet today. And that's enough for the writer in me.
I love that. It's almost like a little krama, a little step by step, like, okay, I'm a little blocked on this project, so I'll just go over here and let out some creative energy. And then I think what you said, moving our bodies, whether it's yoga or going for a walk or swimming. I don't know about you, but as soon as I start to move the prana through, suddenly, I just had a really amazing thought that I want to, write down.
Absolutely. And also, like, we are all hunched over like this. If we don't stretch these things out, if we don't move them, and then what about cortisol? What about endorphins? So there's prana, there's real stretching, there's all these happy and sad hormones. That movement is necessary and like very often writers will feel, no, I'll just drink this bottle of wine and 5 mugs of coffee and get this done, and then it'll be over. While the thing is, no, wean away from all. Just leave all of that and get out and get some fresh air. Don't become the work.
What I love that you're saying is you're making it joyful. You're making it fun. You're making it interesting. It's not like, it's more like the joy is in the journey.
Yes.
We're not just trying to get to this outcome.
And every book takes its own time, Amy. Like when Louisiana Catch took about 6 years for me to write, because that's how work was happening. I wrote a poetry book while I was writing the book that, my mom passed away. A lot of things have my energy found a different channel. I needed to deal with my own healing and grieving before I could write this novel, versus A Piece of Peace happened much sooner. I started to write a novel last year. I have no idea what's happening because I just don't have the time to write. And I'm like, it'll happen when it happens. Until such time that I'm tweeting or sharing a Facebook update or an Instagram post or writing a blog post, that's all still writing. So when you take that pressure off of yourself, then one Sunday I know I'll go to a coffee shop and I'll be, okay, 2 liters of Earl Grey happening today. And I'm like writing one character out.
That's amazing. I love that. Well, the last chapter I want to talk about in your new book, A Piece of Peace, is about women supporting women. And you just being on this podcast is a way of supporting me and all of our listeners. But tell us more about women supporting women and why you think that's so important.
So, I'll say this firstly, thank you for asking this question because it's very important to me. It's a big part of what I do is supporting, being there for other women writers, women business owners, women in wellness, because for 2 reasons. I feel like the more of us do this, the more the demand for a profession goes up. So like I've had people reach out to me for Ayurveda consultation. And I'm like, I think somebody else would be a better fit for you. And I'll introduce them. And I've had people ask me, but you're passing on a client. I was like, what is meant to be mine will always be mine. Like you have to approach life from a growth mindset. And what do you want to do? Hoard, die tomorrow and hoard clients? Like, what's the point? Where is the joy in being a wellness practitioner if you're all about hoarding? And again, from like a writing perspective, male writers, no one asks them. And there's been research that's been done about this, where when you say, what do you do for a living? You say writing. No one says, so what's your real job? But women are asked that. Oh, rich partner. Oh, you must be a housewife. So it like, for some reason, the gender difference is very apparent, not just in the advances that you get paid. Just looking at the publishing industry, there are more male writers that are published compared to women, right? Mm-hmm. It's also when they don't take your work seriously, it's the frail writerly ego becomes even frailer when someone thinks you're doing this as like a pastime, kind of a hobby, right? So I feel like it's so important to have these spaces and communities where like, no, I see you, I hear you, you're amazing. And you're not doing this just because you didn't want to cook dinner today. No, this is who you are. You're managing to do this despite your billion responsibilities. I have never heard a man being asked, so what is your real job, when they say they are a writer. I've been on panels, I've been at writing conferences, but women are constantly asked, like, so no, but what is your real job? So I think that's why also we need these communities to support one another, And I'm like, I prefer to support women-owned businesses. I'll buy from women-owned businesses, books written by women, because you know what? There is this, while I believe in this fair and equal world, but the reality is there is a gender parity, and we all have to do our own bit to help bridge the gap.
And I agree. And I think we need a matriarchal voice out there combating the patriarchy. And that's not to say men are with patriarchy and women are with matriarchy, because we know there's plenty of women that have adopted patriarchal ways of being in the world and vice versa, right? But just to have the feminine essence out there with a voice, of course we should support each other in bringing this forward. And I include my male friends that are willing to honor the feminine.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll start with my husband. He gets that. I completely agree with you. There are so many women who have adopted patriarchy, and there's so many men who are feminists. And nothing in the radical sense, I mean, like just believing in equal rights. And it's important to have these conversations, to be in these spaces, because I've also realized oftentimes people who've not been through these experiences don't realize what the other people are suffering.
Right.
So it's important to not have this assumption that, oh, they're out to hurt XYZ. No, it's sometimes they just don't know any better.
Right. And all of us have blind spots that until, I think that's what Black Lives Matter, that's what the Me Too movement, I have so many older men friends that had no idea how women were feeling in the corporations, in workplaces, they just didn't know. And now they do. So, well, Sweta, we're coming close to an hour here. Is there anything that you would like to say before we finish? And also, how can we be in touch with you and be in community with you?
So yes, the one thing I want to remind everyone who's tuning in, please don't think self-care is selfish, because no one can serve others from an empty cup. When we take care of ourselves, we heal ourselves, and we heal our families, then our communities, and the world becomes a kinder place. And so when we practice self-care, and by self-care, I don't mean going to the spa. That could be a part of it, but really tuning into what you need, what you want. That goes back to that whole vow of silence thing. Check in with yourself. How are you feeling? It's okay to care about yourself, because when we feel replenished, I know I'm a better person in every which way when I feel like I've been taken care of, right? So that would be my biggest thing that I want to share with everyone. Like it changes your world. It changes your lens on how you experience the world when you practice self-care. As for staying in touch, my website is swetavikram.com. You're more than welcome to sign up for the newsletter. I email once a month, and it's full of fun Ayurvedic tips.
Wonderful. And in the post show, I'll show your website and show them a bunch of other stuff about who you are. So Thank you so much for joining me on this fall afternoon. I'm sure it's already dark out there in New York, and I appreciate you staying up a little bit late to have this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. This was really amazing and wish you all the best with everything that you do. Thank you.
I am really grateful for this time that I had with Sweta because I feel like she was so generous. And generosity is a lost art in the world today. This idea of being of service just because it feels good and it's wonderful to connect and feel each other's hearts and offer ourselves in service to another human. I feel like that's part of the essence of who Sweta is. And I feel like she was very generous with all of us. And the other day I was talking to my friend Arun Deva, and we were, talking about Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhism and all sorts of stuff. And we kind of brought up this idea of generosity, and that there's been some really interesting research done by Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, regarding the neural pathways that are stimulated when we are generous. And so Arun was sharing that work with me, and I was just totally into it and thought that was so cool. And then later in the conversation, we started talking about how when you are experiencing higher consciousness, that it always has more to do with our interconnectedness and very little to do with being selfish or I'm going to take care of me and mine kind of attitude. That moving up the levels of consciousness towards enlightenment or towards divinity always involves this idea of interconnectedness. And then Arun and I had this amazing aha moment of, oh my gosh, interconnectedness and generosity are one and the same. And that when those neural pathways of generosity are stimulated and you feel interconnected, you feel like I want to give to you and possibly even receive, right? That is a beautiful place to be. And so that's what I felt with Sweta tonight. And I just want to thank her. She is a generous, kind, open-hearted person. And I think that's really unique and really rare in this world today, especially during these really difficult times where maybe the natural response is to kind of shut down and go take care of me instead of sharing with you. But her new book, A Piece of Peace, is a beautiful, generous offering to help all of us that are trying to get through the pandemic and also trying to engage in the writing process, which can be really difficult. And also dealing with chronic illness. Like she said, these three things, chronic illness, the pandemic, and possibly even being stuck as a writer, they actually have a lot of common threads. And that's what she talks about in her new book, A Piece of Peace, which came out on September 21st, 2021. And you can find it on Amazon.com, Target, and Barnes & Noble. So thank you, Sweta. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle, and we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. and Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.